You're listening to Ghostumentary Scary Short Stories, original pieces updated throughout the week.
Horrorscope. Naomi stood alone at the edge of Centennial Square in Atlanta, staring up at the building where her best friend Marnie had ended her life. It still didn't make sense. Marnie had been different these past few months. Her brightness dimmed, her laugh becoming something rare and bitter. But what Naomi couldn't shake was the paranoia Marnie had carried, whispering about eyes always watching her, tracking her every move. Marnie's final spiral had been fast and brutal. Naomi tried everything, calling, visiting, begging her to seek help. But in the end, Marnie had chosen to leap. Naomi replayed those moments in her head endlessly, her mind gnawing on questions that had no answers. And then the nightmares started. A few days after Marnie's death, Naomi was allowed into her friend's home. Marnie's apartment felt wrong, as though it was frozen in the moment before her death, everything untouched yet dripping with grief. It wasn't long before Naomi found something strange, a stack of cut-out horoscopes. There had to be over 100 of them, neatly folded and stacked in Marnie's bedside drawer, dating back months. Naomi frowned as she sifted through them. Why had Marnie been keeping them? She had never been the kind of person to follow astrology. But the deeper Naomi dug, the stranger it became. The horoscopes weren't generic at all. Each one was shockingly specific. They described Marnie's life, every tiny detail of it. A trip to New York, her breakup with Gil, her mother's illness. The eerie part was that the horoscopes weren't predicting these things. They were recording them. Naomi's skin prickled. Had Marnie been following these, or had they been following her? Naomi began comparing the dates on the horoscopes with Marnie's social media posts. The pattern was undeniable. Each horoscope coincided perfectly with moments in Marnie's life. On October 16th, Marnie had broken up with Gil, her controlling, toxic boyfriend. The next day, October 17th, the horoscope read, "Now that you're free, embrace new challenges." It was almost as if the stars themselves were dictating her life, one cryptic message at a time. Naomi's heart dropped when she reached the final horoscope. Dated March 5th, the very day Marnie jumped to her death. It read, "All hope is lost. The only chance to end your pain is to make the leap to your next life." The last word, printed in bold, chilled Naomi to the core. Jump. She felt sick, her hands shaking. How had Marnie become so consumed by these horoscopes that she'd followed them to her death? Why hadn't Naomi seen the signs? She cursed herself for not being able to save her friend. Desperate for answers, Naomi searched through Marnie's things for any clue about where these horoscopes came from. There was no newspaper header, no magazine title, just the snippets, carefully clipped. Who had written these? Where did Marnie find them? In her despair, Naomi took the stack to the police, but to them it was just another tragic suicide. No foul play, no investigation. It wasn't a crime, they told her, just a terrible coincidence. Naomi left the station, still reeling. How could they not see? As she pulled into her driveway later that evening, she mindlessly checked her mail, flipping through the usual bills and junk. But one small scrap of paper made her freeze. A horoscope, dated that very day. You'll be tempted to seek answers to other people's choices, but sometimes it's best to let things go. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The words seemed to be speaking directly to her, warning her. She looked around her street, scanning for any sign of someone watching her. But the road was empty, quiet. She ran inside, locking the door behind her, her heart racing. Who had left this for her? Was it the same person who had been tormenting Marnie? Naomi spent the night in fear, rereading the horoscope over and over. Its vagueness felt sinister, like it was meant to manipulate her. The next morning, the dread hadn't lifted. She called her mother, trying to explain everything. But as the words left her mouth, she realized how insane it all sounded. She decided to downplay it, not mentioning the horoscope she found at her house. Her mother's comforting voice did little to soothe her. Later that day, Naomi opened her front door to see her mailbox slightly ajar. Her stomach turned. Another horoscope was waiting for her. It's dangerous to delve into matters that aren't yours to understand. She dropped the paper, her hands trembling. It was too specific. How did this horoscope know she had just been on the phone with her mother, talking about these very things? Was she being watched? How? By now, Naomi was sure someone was spying on her. She felt violated, exposed. She wanted to call the police, but the thought of the horoscope's writer knowing stopped her. She spent the day hiding in her house, blinds drawn, barely moving. As night fell, she couldn't take the suffocating fear any longer. At 9 p.m., she stepped outside, slowly making her way to the mailbox. No horoscope. A sigh of relief. Maybe they followed normal rules, only one per day. Maybe she was safe for the night, But the next morning, another horoscope awaited her. This one simply read, "You feel like no one is listening, but today you will be heard." Hours passed. Naomi did laundry, watched TV, tried to distract herself, but the words kept looping in her mind. Who would hear her today? Her phone rang and she nearly jumped out of her skin. It was a police detective, the same one she had spoken to about Marnie. He had done a little digging, he said, and discovered a similar case, another suicide tied to horoscopes a few years ago. He didn't know if it was connected, but he thought it was worth looking into. He promised to meet her soon. Naomi hung up, her heart pounding. Today's horoscope had come true. She was being heard. But how? How could these predictions be so accurate? Was it something supernatural? Or something worse? Something she couldn't understand? The next morning, Naomi's breath caught in her throat as she read the new horoscope. As you experience the death of someone near to you, a wave of panic flooded her. Who was going to die? She called the detective, but it went to voicemail. No message. She left the house quickly, her nerves shot. Police cars lined the street when she stepped outside. Her neighbor had suffered a heart attack. Naomi felt a pang of guilt. She barely knew them, but the horoscope had been right. The death was near her. At least today's surprises were over. Tuesday morning came with a dull gray light filtering through the curtains, and Naomi didn't need her alarm to wake her. She was already up, her stomach knotted tight with anxiety. The first thing she did was rush to the mailbox. It had become a habit now, checking every morning like some addict needing a fix. And there it was, just like every other day, today's horoscope, folded neatly in her trembling hands. She unfolded it, her pulse quickening. Today's encounter will not go as planned. 2 will meet and 1 will die. The words leapt off the page, jagged and cold. A shiver ran down her spine. What the hell did that mean? Was she going to die? Was someone coming for her? Naomi swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear creeping into her mouth. She crumpled the note in her fist, staring out at the empty street. The neighborhood looked quiet, as it always did. But now it felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting. She couldn't go to work. No way in hell. Naomi grabbed her phone and dialed her boss's number with shaky fingers. "Yeah, not feeling great," she said when he picked up, her voice flat, disconnected. "I'm calling in sick." After hanging up, she stood in the middle of her living room, every nerve in her body buzzing. She felt exposed, vulnerable. The windows. She should close the windows. She hurried from one to the next, pulling the blinds tight until the house was dim and sealed in. Naomi wasn't sure what to do. She paced, wringing her hands. Her eyes fell on the couch and a flicker of memory came rushing back. The gun. The old revolver her father had given her almost a decade ago. She wasn't sure if it even worked anymore, if bullets went bad or something. But that didn't matter right now. She needed it. Her hand shook as she dug it out of the closet, feeling the weight of it, cold and solid. It was reassuring in a strange way. Naomi slipped it under the couch cushion, the thought settling uncomfortably in her mind, just in case. She didn't eat, didn't even turn on the TV. All she did was sit there, feeling like prey, waiting for the trap to spring. And then came the knock. Naomi froze. It was a sharp, authoritative knock, the kind that sent a jolt of dread through her. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Could it be them? The person sending these goddamn horoscopes? She crept to the window, peeking out from the edge of the blinds. The breath she'd been holding released in a rush when she saw the police car parked at the curb and the man standing at her door, Detective Easters. She recognized him. They'd spoken before when she'd tried to report the strange horoscopes. He hadn't believed her then, but now, maybe he'd finally come around. Naomi opened the door slowly, relief flooding her. "Detective," she greeted, forcing a smile. "Come in, please." He didn't smile back. His face was hard, tight with something that wasn't quite concern. It was more like suspicion. He stepped inside but didn't sit when she motioned to the couch. "I need to ask you some questions," Easter said, his voice as cold as the horoscope she'd read earlier. He didn't wait for her to respond, just started in. "You've been receiving these horoscopes, right? Can you show me today's?" Naomi blinked, confused by his abruptness, but she nodded. She handed him the crumpled piece of paper. Easters unfolded it and read it, his eyes narrowing, his jaw clenched. "Step away from the couch, Naomi," he said, his voice suddenly flat, authoritative. "What?" She frowned. "Why?" "Just do it." His tone was sharp now, his eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. Something was wrong. He was acting strange, more than just a cop doing his job. There was tension in the air, like static before a lightning strike. "I don't understand," Naomi said, inching closer to the couch, closer to the gun hidden beneath the cushion. Her heartbeat was in her throat now, hammering painfully. "Why are you acting like this?" Easters reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it up so she could see it. It was another horoscope, the same neat handwriting, today's date at the top. Naomi's mouth went dry as he opened it. The message was simple. "There's a gun under the pillow, and she's going to shoot you with it." Her stomach turned to ice. Easter's voice was tight with tension. "Is there a gun under that pillow?" Her mind raced, her thoughts spinning wildly. It was all starting to make sense now. The cryptic warning from her horoscope, the detective's strange behavior. Today, someone would die. It didn't say who. He asked her again, his voice growing sharper, more urgent. "Is there a gun under that pillow, Naomi?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, she turned, her body moving on instinct, reaching for the pillow. Easters shouted, his hand flying to the holster on his hip, drawing his weapon. "Stop!" he barked, his gun now aimed at her. But Naomi's hands were already lifting the pillow, and she could feel the cold metal beneath it. She had to reach it. Had to get it. If someone was going to die, it sure as hell wasn't going to be her. Easter's voice was strained, his gun trembling slightly. "Don't do this, Naomi." But she wasn't listening. She grabbed the revolver, spun around and aimed it at the detective. There was no time to think. The world had narrowed down to two people, two guns, and one split second. The shots rang out, deafening, like thunder cracking through the room. 2 bangs, 2 bullets. Naomi staggered, the gun heavy in her hand. Her ears were ringing, the world a blurry haze around her. She looked down at her shoulder, where blood was already soaking through her shirt. She'd been hit, but she was alive. She turned her gaze to Easters, who lay crumpled on the floor, a single bullet hole clean through his forehead. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, glassy and vacant. Naomi blinked, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd killed him. The horoscope had been right. 2 met, and 1 died. But it didn't feel like victory, only cold, crushing dread. She dropped the gun and backed away from the body, her mind reeling. The detective was dead. She was alive, but for how long? Whoever was sending these horoscopes had known what would happen. They were playing with her, and now she was a killer. And tomorrow? Tomorrow another horoscope would come.
Looking for more scary tales? Subscribe to our podcast and visit ghostumentary.com. Let us know what you think or share with us your scary tales. We might just make a new story from it.